It was late afternoon when he stepped into the small bakery, the kind with warm lights and the smell of fresh bread drifting out into the street. He pushed the glass door gently, almost as if he didn't want to disturb anyone inside. His clothes were simple and a little worn, the kind that showed years of careful use. He looked tired, not just the tiredness that comes from a long day, but the kind that settles deep inside a person who has been struggling for a long time. Still, there was something soft and hopeful in his eyes, like he carried a reason that kept him moving forward even when life felt heavy. He walked slowly toward the counter, taking in the shelves of pastries and cakes. There were bright, colorful ones with thick frosting, small ones decorated with tiny candies, and a few large ones on display for special occasions. He paused, staring at them the way a person might look at something both beautiful and out of reach. The bakery was quiet, with only a few customers sitting at tables chatting softly, and the faint sound of a radio playing a gentle tune. He cleared his throat, almost nervously, as the young cashier behind the counter smiled politely at him. She seemed friendly, the kind of person who tried her best to make customers feel welcome even on busy days. He took a moment to gather his words before speaking. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice gentle and careful. "I was wondering, do you have any cakes that are discounted? Maybe something from earlier today?" The cashier blinked, slightly surprised by the question. Most people came in asking for new cakes, custom orders, or special designs. His request was rare, but not unheard of. She gave him a kind look and leaned forward a little to hear him better. "We sometimes have discounted cakes," she explained, "but it depends on the day. Let me check for you." As she stepped away to look in the back storage area, he waited quietly, holding the straps of the bag on his shoulder. He looked around the bakery again, almost nervously. His eyes briefly met the window where families passed by outside, some carrying shopping bags, some laughing, some walking casually as if life never pressed too hard on them. He swallowed slowly, thinking of why he was here. It was his boy's birthday. The child had been excited for days, talking about how he hoped there might be a little cake, maybe with chocolate frosting if they could find one. He wasn't a child who asked for much. He was used to doing without. But birthdays were special, and even a small slice of sweetness could make a child feel seen and celebrated. The father had saved what little he could over the past few weeks. But unexpected bills, rising prices, and everyday struggles had eaten through almost everything. He didn't want his boy to feel forgotten, not on a day that was meant to remind him that he mattered in this world. That was why he had come to the bakery to at least try. While he waited, he didn't realize someone else in the shop had noticed him. A man in a well-fitted coat, standing a little behind him in the line, quietly observed the interaction with calm eyes. He seemed like someone who moved through life with confidence and ease, the kind of person who rarely needed to worry about small expenses. Yet something about the father's quiet posture drew his attention. The father kept his gaze low, as though he didn't want anyone to pay too much attention to him. He wasn't ashamed of wanting to do something kind for his child. No father should be, but he was embarrassed by the position life had pushed him into. He hoped nobody was judging him. The cashier returned after a moment, her face apologetic. "I'm really sorry," she said gently. "We don't have any discounted cakes left today. Everything from the morning was already sold." He nodded quickly, forcing a small smile as if he didn't want her to feel bad. "Oh, that's all right," he said. "Thank you for checking." He didn't argue, didn't ask again. He simply accepted the answer with a softness that came from years of having to make peace with disappointment. He glanced at the display one more time, not in longing, but in acceptance. The cakes were too expensive for him. He had known that before coming, but he had hoped there might be a small chance. He took a tiny breath and turned slightly, preparing to walk out. His hand reached for the door, the same gentle motion he had used when he came in, but the weight of the moment settled on him. He had imagined going home with at least a small cake. He had imagined the light in his boy's eyes. Now he wondered how he would explain it. Behind him, the man in the well-fitted coat watched quietly. He had come into the bakery to pick up a cake for an office event, something routine and quick. But as he listened to the father's soft request and watched the quiet disappointment in his shoulders, something inside him shifted. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. He remembered a time long ago when he himself had struggled, when even a simple cake had felt like a luxury. The father, unaware of any eyes on him, opened the door slowly. A cold breeze slipped inside, brushing against the warm air of the bakery. He stepped halfway through the doorway before pausing. Perhaps he was trying to gather himself before facing the outside world again. Perhaps he was replaying the cashier's words, thinking of how to turn the moment into something hopeful for his child. The bakery lights glowed softly behind him, reflecting off the glass cases filled with treats he couldn't afford. He stood there for just a heartbeat. It's long enough for anyone watching to sense that he wasn't merely leaving a store. He was leaving behind a hope he had carried all day. Inside the bakery, the man in the coat continued to watch. The father's gentle voice, his simple request, the quiet dignity in the way he handled the disappointment stayed with him. There was something deeply human about it, something that stirred a corner of his heart he rarely paid attention to anymore. But for the father, the moment was just one more quiet struggle in a line of many. He wasn't thinking about being noticed or judged. His thoughts were on his child, waiting at home, probably counting the hours until he returned. He tightened his grip on the strap of his bag, prepared to fully step out into the street, unaware that his small moment of sadness had just sparked something in the mind of the stranger behind him. And though he didn't know it yet, the next few minutes would change the course of his day and maybe even his life in a way he never expected. For now, though, he was just a father trying his best, hoping that somehow, some way, he would still be able to make his boy smile on his special day. The father stood outside the bakery for a long moment, letting the cold air settle around him. It wasn't the kind of cold that made a person shiver, but the kind that quietly reminded them how hard life could be. He took a deep breath as he stepped fully onto the sidewalk, and the glass door closed behind him with a soft sound. For a second, he considered walking back in and pretending he could afford something small. Maybe a single cupcake, just so his boy wouldn't feel forgotten. But even that was stretching his limits. He walked slowly down the street, unsure of what to do next. He kept replaying the cashier's kind but apologetic voice in his mind. She hadn't done anything wrong, and he didn't blame her at all. She had even tried to help, but the outcome still stung. He had gone in with hope, and he was leaving with nothing. As he walked, his steps were heavy, and his thoughts tangled together like threads he couldn't separate. He wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about the boy waiting at home, probably counting the hours, maybe even staying awake on purpose, just to celebrate together. The father imagined the small face looking up at him with expectation. He imagined the child asking, "Did you find something?" And he imagined not having anything to show. It made his chest feel tight inside the bakery. The man in the well-fitted coat still stood by the counter. He watched the father walk away, and something inside him stirred even more deeply. He looked at the cashier, who had returned to organizing the counter, and then back at the door the father had just exited. The man wasn't sure why this particular moment had touched him. He had seen people in tough situations before. He had heard stories, witnessed struggles, and known what hardship looked like. But there was something different about this father. Maybe it was the quietness, maybe the dignity, or maybe the way he tried to hide his disappointment so no one would feel uncomfortable. The man stepped forward and cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me," he said to the cashier. She looked up with a smile. "Yes, how can I help you?" He glanced toward the door before speaking again. The man who was just here? Did he want a discounted cake because he couldn't afford a full-priced one? The cashier hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should say anything. She didn't want to share someone else's personal struggle. But she also sensed that the man asking wasn't doing so out of curiosity or judgment. "I think so," she said softly. He asked very politely. "I could tell he was hoping we had something." She paused. "He seemed like a nice person." The man nodded slowly. That confirmed what he had already felt. Something in him made a quiet decision, one that came naturally, without hesitation or second thought. Meanwhile, the father kept walking, though he wasn't headed anywhere in particular. His steps led him toward the bus stop because that was his usual route home. The streetlights flickered on above him one by one, casting a warm orange glow over the pavement. The night air carried the smell of street food from a nearby stall. People moved around him without really noticing him at all. He didn't mind being unnoticed. It was easier that way. Sometimes attention brought questions he didn't want to answer. Sometimes it brought pity, which felt even worse. He reached the bus stop and sat down on the small bench, exhaling slowly. A few people stood nearby, checking their phones or talking quietly among themselves. Nobody paid him any special attention. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a worn bus card and held it in his hand, rubbing the edges with his thumb. He thought again about his boy waiting at home. He remembered how excited the child had been that morning, talking about blowing out a candle, even if it was just one small candle stuck into whatever treat they could find. The father had promised he would try. He didn't promise success, but he had promised effort. Now even that felt uncertain. Back at the bakery, the man in the coat made his way to the cake display. He scanned the options, the colorful frosting, the neatly piped decorations, the freshly made layers, none of which felt right as they were. He turned to the cashier again. "Do you have anything special? Something with chocolate? Something a child might love?" he asked. The cashier thought for a moment. Then she brightened. "We actually have a cake that was just finished an hour ago. It's one of our best ones. It has chocolate layers and vanilla cream inside. It's usually ordered for birthdays." She pointed toward a beautiful cake decorated with simple but elegant patterns. The man nodded once. "I'll take it," the cashier blinked. "Would you like it boxed? Or is it for here?" "Box it, please," he said. Then he hesitated for only a second. "And could you do me a favor?" She tilted her head slightly. "Of course. Could you include a blank card? Just something small I can write a note on." She nodded immediately. "Yes, we have some simple cards for special orders. I'll add one for you." The man waited while she packed the cake carefully. As she wrapped it inside a sturdy box and tied a thin ribbon around it, he reached for the card she handed him. He took a moment to write something quietly, something he hoped would bring comfort rather than embarrassment. When everything was ready, he picked up the box gently, thanked the cashier, and stepped out of the bakery. The cold air touched his face, and he looked down the street in the direction the father had walked. He didn't move immediately, though. He took a slow breath, letting the weight of what he was about to do settle on him, not because it was hard, but because it meant something. At the bus stop, the father looked up when he heard footsteps approaching. He didn't expect anyone to come toward him. People usually kept to themselves. So did he. He saw the man from the bakery, the one who had been behind him in line, walking toward the bench with a steady, calm pace. The father straightened his back slightly, unsure why the man would be approaching him. Maybe he had dropped something in the bakery. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. The man stopped in front of him, holding the cake box with both hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The father's eyes shifted from the man's face to the box, confused. "Excuse me," the man finally said, his tone gentle and respectful. "I hope you don't mind me coming over." I saw what happened inside. Father felt his cheeks warm with embarrassment. He looked down automatically, his fingers tightening around the straps of his bag. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," he said softly. "You didn't?" the man replied. "You asked politely. You didn't do anything wrong." The father looked up slowly, unsure what the man wanted. The man extended the cake box toward him. "This is for you," he said. "For your boy?" The father blinked, stunned. No, I can't accept that," he said immediately. "It's too much." "I can't." "You can," the man said gently. "And you're not accepting charity. You're accepting a birthday gift. A simple one. From one person who has been where you are, to another who's doing his best." The father felt his throat tighten. He looked at the box again, then back at the man. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "You don't need to," the man replied. "Just make your boy smile. That's enough." He handed over the box, and the father took it slowly, as if holding something delicate and precious. He felt the warmth of the act more than the warmth of the bakery from earlier. His eyes stung, and he blinked rapidly to keep them clear. The man gave him a small nod before stepping back. "Take care," he said simply, and then he turned and walked away, not waiting for praise or gratitude. The father sat there holding the cake, hardly believing what had just happened. People around him continued waiting for their buses, unaware of the quiet moment of kindness unfolding in front of them. He slowly opened the top of the box and saw a small card placed neatly on top of the cake. He picked it up and read the short message the man had written. The words were simple, honest, and gentle words that didn't make him feel small, but made him feel seen. He closed the box carefully, holding it close to his chest. For the first time that day, he felt a different kind of warmth spread through him, not from a store or a street light, but from the kindness of a stranger who had chosen to notice him when no one else did. He sat a little straighter on the bench, waiting for the bus, no longer feeling the weight of disappointment pulling at his shoulders. Instead, he felt something lighter: hope, gratitude, and the quiet joy of knowing that tonight his boy would smile after all, and the man who had helped him walked away into the night, unaware of how deeply his simple act would ripple into someone else's life. The bus arrived with a soft rumble, its headlights washing over the pavement and the people waiting at the stop. The father stood up carefully, still holding the cake box with both hands as if it were the most precious thing he owned. He stepped onto the bus slowly, nodding politely at the driver, and moved to an empty seat near the window. As he settled down, he placed the cake on his lap, keeping one hand gently on top of it, making sure it didn't shift or slide. The bus doors closed behind him, and the vehicle began to move. The city lights blurred slightly as they passed, glowing softly in the night. People around him chatted in quiet voices or stared at their phones, unaware of the small miracle resting in the father's arms. He looked out the window, but his thoughts were far away, drifting between what had just happened and what waited for him at home. He replayed the moment at the bus stop, when the man approached him with kindness instead of judgment. He remembered the gentle tone, the respectful words, the simple reassurance that he wasn't accepting charity. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken to him that way. A long time since someone had looked at him and seen a person. It's not a problem. He opened the cake box just a little, peeking inside again to reassure himself that it was real. The cake looked perfect, almost too perfect for what he had expected to bring home. The small card was still nestled on top, and just seeing it made warmth rise in his chest. He didn't read the message again. He didn't need to. The words were already etched into his heart. As the bus continued forward, leaned back in his seat and let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He thought of his boy waiting at home. He's probably pacing around their small living room or looking out the window every few minutes. The child had been talking all day about how excited he was, even though he knew they didn't have much. He had asked only once that morning, "Do you think we can get a cake today?" And the father had answered honestly, "I will do my best." Now, for the first time in a long while, his best had been enough. The bus made a few stops along the way, picking up and dropping off passengers. A woman carrying groceries sat down a couple of seats away. A pair of friends talked quietly in the back, laughing about something that had happened earlier. Life continued around him, ordinary and unbothered. While his own heart felt anything but ordinary, he wondered about the man who had helped him. Who was he? Why had he stepped forward? He didn't seem like he did it for attention. He didn't wait for thanks or questions. He walked away almost immediately, as if what he had done was nothing more than handing someone directions or holding a door. The father's mind wandered through the possibilities. Maybe the man had grown up in a difficult life too. Maybe he understood the weight of wanting to give your child something special, even when the world made it hard. Maybe he simply believed in helping others quietly. Whatever the reason, the father felt grateful in a way he couldn't even put into words. The bus finally neared his stop. He rose from his seat slowly, careful not to jostle the cake. When the bus doors opened, he stepped out into the cooler air and began the short walk home. His neighborhood wasn't fair, an older area with small houses lined close together, some with peeling paint, some with dim lights glowing from inside. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. As he walked down the narrow street, he noticed a familiar shape standing near the gate of his house. His boy was there, bouncing lightly on his heels as if he couldn't hold still. When the child saw him from a distance, he waved eagerly, calling out in a bright voice that echoed in the quiet street. "Did you get something?" the boy asked, running toward him with eager steps. The father felt his heart tug gently. He knelt down to the child's height, holding the cake slightly to the side so it wouldn't get bumped. "I did," he said with a soft smile. The child's eyes widened as he noticed the box, the ribbon tied neatly around it. "A cake?" he whispered, as if afraid saying it too loudly would make it disappear. "A cake," the father confirmed. The boy let out a cheer so full of joy it warmed the air around them. He reached out to touch the box, but the father gently placed his hand over the child's to stop him from shaking it too much. "Careful," he said with a laugh. "Let's take it inside first." Together they walked up the small path toward their front door. The child rushed ahead to open it, nearly stumbling in his excitement, and then hurried back to help guide the cake inside. Their home was modest, with simple furniture and warm lighting. The father placed the cake gently on the table in the center of the room. The child circled the table, staring at the box from every angle as if it were a treasure chest. "Can I open it?" he asked eagerly. "Go ahead," the father said. The boy carefully untied the ribbon, lifting the lid slowly. When he saw the cake inside, his eyes grew even wider, sparkled with awe. It was far more beautiful than anything he had expected. Chocolate layers, soft cream details, and a smooth finish that looked like something out of a bakery commercial. "Wow," the child breathed. "It looks amazing." The father stood quietly behind him, watching the joy unfold. That one moment, the look of pure happiness on his child's face made every difficult step of the day worth it. He felt a lump in his throat but didn't let it show. The boy reached inside the box again and noticed the card. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it," the father said, though his voice softened. The child opened the small card and read the message inside. His smile grew even brighter. "Someone gave this to us?" he asked. The father nodded. "A kind person. Someone who wanted to help? Why would someone help us?" The boy asked in a curious voice, not out of doubt but wonder. "Because sometimes," the father said, choosing his words slowly, "there are people who see others trying their best, and they decide to make the day a little easier." The boy looked down at the card again, then at the cake, then back at his father. He didn't say anything for a moment, but the way he looked at his father said everything. There was admiration, trust, and a deep love that didn't need to be spoken aloud. "Can we put a candle on it?" the boy asked excitedly. The father nodded. "Let me find one." He went to the small kitchen drawer, where he kept odds and ends. He rummaged around until he found an old packet of candles left over from a previous year. There was only one candle left, but that was enough. He brought it back to the table, and the boy placed it carefully in the center of the cake. The father lit the candle with a small lighter, kept for emergencies. The tiny flame flickered warmly, casting a gentle glow over the room. The child clasped his hands together, eyes sparkling with excitement. "Make a wish," the father whispered. The boy squeezed his eyes shut, stayed still for a moment, and then blew out the candle with a joyful puff. The flame disappeared, and the boy clapped his hands. "Can we eat it now?" he asked eagerly. The father laughed softly. "Yes, we can." He cut the cake carefully, making sure the first slice was perfect. He placed it on a small plate and handed it to the boy. The child took the fork and tasted the first bite, his face lighting up even more. "It's so good," he exclaimed. The father took a bite himself, and he nodded with a smile. The cake truly was delicious, better than anything they could have afforded. But what mattered wasn't the taste, it was the moment they spent the next half hour talking, laughing and enjoying the cake together. The boy talked about school, about his dreams, about little things that made him happy. The father listened, smiling at every story, feeling the heaviness of the day slowly melt away, and somewhere across the city, the man who had given the cake walked into his own home, unaware that he had helped create a memory that would stay with his family for a lifetime. But the night wasn't over. The kindness that began at the bakery had started something bigger, something that would grow in ways none of them could yet see. For now, though in that small home with warm light and simple furniture, a father and his boy shared a birthday they would never forget. The evening air outside the small town. Clinic felt colder than earlier in the day, almost as if the world was holding its breath. The young man stepped outside slowly, still trying to make sense of everything that had happened in the past few hours. He had come here expecting a simple interview, a moment that could shape his entire future. But instead, the moment had slipped away as he chose to help an older gentleman who looked lost and unwell. Now, after everything the doctor had explained, he felt a mix of worry and confusion tugging inside him. The older man was stable, at least for now. But the way the doctor had spoken made it clear that this wasn't something small. And the strange part, the older man wasn't just thankful. He had insisted the young man stay close, almost as if he needed him there. He walked toward a small bench outside the clinic. The street lamps gave off a warm glow, and the roads were quiet. Only a few cars passed every few minutes. He sat down heavily, leaned forward, and rubbed his hands together. He didn't know why, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was unfolding. Something he hadn't asked for, hadn't expected, but couldn't walk away from. A few minutes later, the clinic door opened. A nurse stepped out and walked toward him. "He's awake," she said gently, "and he keeps asking for you. Would you like to come in?" The young man nodded without saying a word and followed her back inside. They walked down a long hallway until they reached a quiet room near the end. The nurse pushed the door open and he stepped in. The older man was sitting up on the hospital bed, slightly pale but alert. His eyes softened the moment he saw the young man. "There you are," the old man said with a faint smile. "I was worried you had left." "No, sir," the young man replied softly. "I was just outside." "I'm glad you're feeling a bit better." The older man motioned for him to come closer. "Please sit. I want to talk to you." The young man pulled a chair forward and sat beside the bed. The older man took a slow breath. "You didn't have to help me back there. You could have walked away." "Many would have. Most, maybe. But you didn't." "I couldn't just leave you there," he said quietly. "You looked like you needed help." The older man nodded, as if that confirmed something he had already been thinking. "And for that, I owe you more than you know," he said. The young man shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Anyone would have done the same." The older man smiled at that sadly, but almost proudly. "Not everyone, but you did, and it mattered." There was a pause, a silence that felt meaningful rather than awkward. Then the older man spoke again, slower this time. I imagine you're wondering why I was in such a rush earlier. Why I looked so out of place, so confused." The young man didn't want to pry, so he said nothing. But the older man continued anyway. "I had left my office earlier than usual," he said, looking up at the ceiling as he spoke. "My doctor had given me some news a few weeks ago. News I didn't take seriously. I thought I could ignore it, push through it, pretend it didn't exist. But today, it caught up with me." His voice trembled just slightly. "The dizziness. The chest pain. It happened so suddenly that I didn't even realize where my driver had dropped me. I just told him to stop the car. And I walked. I don't even know why I walked that direction. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was something else." He looked directly at the young man now. "Maybe it was meant to lead me to you." The young man felt a strange weight in his chest, unsure how to respond. "When you helped me," the older man said softly, "you didn't know who I was. You didn't care who I was. You just saw someone who needed help. People rarely do that without wanting something in return. Well, you didn't even hesitate." The young man swallowed hard. "I just did what felt right." The older man nodded slowly, as if those words meant more than the young man realized. "Tell me," the older man said, "where were you going today? Why were you in such a hurry?" The young man let out a small breath, then looked down at his hands. "I had an interview," he admitted. "A really important one. It was the kind of opportunity that doesn't come often. I'd prepared for it for weeks. But when I met you and saw you struggling, I didn't want to leave you there alone. I thought I'd help you first and then run to the interview afterward. But by the time we got here, I knew I'd missed it." He paused, his voice softer now. "I tried calling them earlier, but no one picked up. So I guess it wasn't meant to happen." The old man watched him for a long time, his eyes full of something unreadable. "When you don't regret helping me?" he asked, The young man shook his head firmly. Of course not. You needed help. That mattered more in the moment. The older man smiled again. A small but warm expression. You have no idea how rare that is, he whispered. There was another pause. Quieter this time, the kind that fills the room with understanding. Finally, the older man reached for the glass of water beside him and took a small sip. Then he set it down and cleared his throat. I should tell you something, he said. Something important. But before I do, promise me you won't panic, he chuckled softly, or run away. The young man looked confused but nodded slowly. All right. Oh. The older man folded his hands together, almost as though gathering courage. The place you were supposed to go today, he began. The company that had called you for an interview? I know it very well. The young man frowned slightly. You do? The older man nodded. Yes, in fact. He took a breath. I own it. The room felt suddenly still. The young man stared at him, not fully processing what he had just heard. The older man continued calmly. I'm the founder. The chairman, the person who was supposed to meet you today. The young man froze in place. A warmth moved up his neck as everything began to connect. The expensive watch, the driver, the way he carried himself, the quiet authority in his tone. All of it made sense now. He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. The older man chuckled lightly at the young man's stunned expression. Yes, he said softly. I was supposed to interview you. I had your resume on my desk. And when I saw your application, something about it made me curious. You didn't have the strongest background, but there was something honest in the way you wrote. Something sincere. I wanted to meet you in person to see if my instinct was correct. He paused, his eyes softening even more. And today, you proved it was. The young man shook his head slowly, disbelief written all over his face. I don't know what to say, he whispered. The older man laughed gently. You don't have to say anything. You've already said enough through your actions. The young man felt his chest tighten with emotion, but he stayed silent. You lost the interview because you chose to help a stranger, the older man continued. Most people would have kept going, but you did not, and that tells me everything I need to know. He leaned back against the pillows. When I watched you guide me, when I saw how patient you were, how genuinely worried, I knew I wasn't wrong about you. The older man took a slow breath before speaking again. So here's what I want to tell you. I'm not going to let your kindness become the reason you lose your chance. In fact, it's the reason you've earned something far better. The sun was slowly dipping behind the rooftops when the father finally stepped out of the bakery with the box in his hands. He held it as if it were something fragile, something precious, something far more important than a cake. The simple ribbon tied around the box brushed against his fingers as he walked, and each step he took felt lighter than the ones before. He kept replaying the moment inside the bakery, almost unable to believe it had happened. One minute, he had been standing there thinking he had failed his boy. The next minute, a stranger had stepped forward and turned the entire moment around. The man hadn't asked for attention, hadn't acted like he was doing something grand. He had just seen someone struggling and decided to help quietly, without expecting anything back. The father kept looking down at the cake box just to make sure it was real. It felt like something from a dream. One of those rare moments when the world suddenly felt kinder than usual. He walked quickly but carefully, taking the familiar turn onto a smaller street where the houses were close together and the walls carried the marks of time. A few kids ran past him, laughing as they chased a ball. He smiled softly, thinking of his own boy waiting at home. When he reached his building, he paused at the entrance. He took a breath, steadying himself. He didn't want to walk in looking emotional or overwhelmed. He wanted the moment to be full of joy for his child, not worry. He climbed the stairs slowly so the cake wouldn't shake too much. The hallway smelled faintly of spices from someone cooking dinner, and the soft sound of a TV came from another apartment. Everything felt strangely peaceful. When he reached his door, he could already hear his boy's footsteps from inside, followed by a little voice asking, "Is that him?" He smiled and opened the door gently. The boy ran toward him immediately, stopping just short of bumping into him when he noticed the box. "What's that?" the boy asked, his eyes wide. The father knelt down and held the box out in front of him. "Happy birthday," he said softly. The boy gasped. A small, sharp breath of surprise escaped him, followed by a sound of pure excitement. Is that a real cake?" The father nodded, watching his boy's joy unfold like sunlight. The child wrapped his arms around him in a quick, tight hug. "I didn't think we could get one this year," he whispered. The father felt his heart twist gently at the words. He hugged him back, careful not to drop the box. "Well," he said with a smile, "sometimes life surprises us." Inside their small apartment, they set the cake on the table. The boy kept circling around it, admiring it, as if it were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Can we light a candle?" the boy asked. The father nodded and searched through a drawer until he found a single candle they had saved from a past celebration. It was a little bent, but it still worked. He placed it carefully on the top of the cake and lit it. The flame flickered softly, lighting the boy's face with a warm glow. "Make a wish," the father said. The boy closed his eyes tightly for a moment, then opened them with a smile and blew out the candle. The tiny puff of smoke rose into the air, and for a moment the room felt full of magic simple. Quiet magic that didn't need anything grand to make it beautiful. They cut the cake together. The father gave his boy the first slice, a generous piece with thick frosting. The boy took a bite and closed his eyes again, savoring the taste. "It's so good," he said with his mouth full. The father laughed softly, feeling warmth spread through him. He hadn't felt this light in a long time as they ate. The boy looked at the cake again and then at his father. "How did you get it?" he asked. The father hesitated for a moment. Thinking about how much to say, there was someone at the bakery, he finally said, "Someone who helped us. Someone who didn't have to." The boy tilted his head. "Why would he help us?" The father thought about the man's calm expression, the quiet way he had stepped forward, the kindness that had shown without any need for thanks. "Because sometimes people see something, and they choose to care," he said softly. The boy nodded slowly, as if he understood more than most children his age would. "I want to meet him," the boy said. "I want to say thank you," the father smiled. "Maybe someday." They continued eating, talking, laughing, enjoying the simple celebration. The cake wasn't just food, it was a moment of hope, something that made the world feel a little less heavy later in the night. After the boy had gone to sleep, the father stepped outside for a moment. He stood near the open window, letting the cool night air brush against his face. He held the empty cake box in his hands. Turning it slowly, he thought again about the man at the bakery, about the way he had noticed him without making him feel small. He wondered if he would ever see him again. He didn't know the man's name, didn't know where he worked or lived. He only knew one thing, that the world still had people like him. He whispered a soft thank you into the night, hoping somehow the feeling would reach the man who had made this evening possible. What he didn't know was that the man had gone home thinking about him too. Across town, in a quiet room with tall windows, the man who had helped him stood near a shelf. Setting down the documents he had carried from work, he removed his coat and loosened his tie, still remembering the father's voice, the softness of the request, and the way he had walked out of the bakery with disappointment written so quietly across his shoulders. He had helped many people before, through charity programs and events at his company. But this felt different. This had been personal, real. It had reminded him of something he had lost over the years, a kind of closeness to everyday people, a heartbeat of empathy that big offices and meetings often drowned out. He poured himself a glass of water, sat by the window. Thinking of the father and the boy he had helped celebrate, he wondered if they were cutting the cake right now. He wondered what the boy had wished for. He wondered if the father had been able to relax, even for a moment, as he sat in silence. He realized something unexpected. He didn't want this to end with just a cake. He wanted to see them again, not because he wanted thanks, he didn't care about that, but because something inside him told him that this small encounter had opened a path he wasn't supposed to ignore. He didn't know how, and he didn't know when, but he knew he would find a way, Some moments come and go without leaving a trace, but some moments stay. They hold on to the heart like a quiet echo, reminding you that you are still human, still capable of caring, still connected to others in ways you can't always explain. The man closed his eyes for a moment and took a breath, feeling the weight of the day settle gently instead of heavily, far across the city. A father and his boy slept peacefully after a birthday they would never forget. And somewhere in the middle of all this, life was already preparing the next chapter for them, a chapter none of them saw coming, but one that would change everything. The next morning arrived quietly in the small apartment. Soft light filtered through the thin curtains, painting a pale glow across the room. The father woke early, not because of an alarm, but because his mind was still full of last night's events. Even while he slept, his thoughts kept drifting back to the bakery, the stranger, the unexpected kindness, and the cake that had brought so much joy to his boy. He sat up slowly, stretching his tired shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he felt something calm inside him. Not relief exactly, but something close, a gentle sense that things might, just might, turn in a better direction. He didn't know why he felt this way. Maybe it was the way the stranger had stepped forward. Maybe it was the look in the man's eyes, steady and warm, like he truly cared. Or maybe it was simply the memory of his boy's smile. He glanced toward the other room. His boy was still fast asleep, curled up with the thin blanket pulled to his chin. The father watched him for a moment, letting quiet gratitude fill his heart. Children had a way of finding joy even in the smallest things. And last night had been proof. He stood up, washed his face, and prepared for the morning. There wasn't much food left in the kitchen, just a little bread and some tea leaves. He wasn't sure how he would manage groceries for the week, but he pushed the thought aside. Worry could wait. For now, he simply wanted his boy to wake up with peace in his heart. A few minutes later, he heard small footsteps and turned to see his son rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Morning," the boy mumbled. "Morning," the father replied with a soft smile. "Did you sleep well?" The boy nodded. "I dreamed about the cake." Father chuckled quietly. "I'm not surprised." They sat together as the father poured warm tea into 2 cups, one for him and one for the boy. The child always liked a little tea with extra water in it so it wouldn't be too strong. As they drank, the boy suddenly set his cup down. "Are we going to see the man again?" he asked. The father hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe not. Sometimes you meet someone kind only once." The boy looked disappointed for a moment, but then nodded with quiet understanding. "Well, I hope he has a good day," the boy said. The father smiled. "I hope so too." They finished breakfast, and the father prepared for his shift at the small workshop where he did repairs. The job didn't pay much, but he was grateful to have it. Every extra hour mattered, especially now. Before leaving, he bent down and kissed his boy's forehead. "Lock the door behind me. I'll be back by evening." The boy nodded and hugged him tightly. The father stepped outside into the cool morning, unaware that across town, the man from the bakery was already awake too. The man sat at his large kitchen table with a cup of coffee in hand. His home was quiet, clean, and filled with the kind of stillness that comes from living alone for many years. Usually, he didn't mind the silence, but today it felt heavier than usual. He kept thinking about the father and the child. He had seen many faces in his life: employees, business people, people wanting favors or deals. But the face of that father, tired but gentle, kept returning to his thoughts. He picked up his phone and stared at the screen. He had employees who could find almost anything with just a few calls. He could ask them to look for the father. But something in him hesitated. He didn't want the father to feel uncomfortable or watched. Instead, he decided something else. He put on his coat and stepped outside. The city was waking up, cars humming softly, street vendors opening their stalls, people walking to work with sleepy eyes and hurried steps. The man walked without rushing. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he trusted his instinct. He made his way back to the bakery. When he stepped inside, the warm smell of bread and sugar greeted him. The same employee from yesterday stood behind the counter, arranging pastries. "Good morning," the man said. The employee looked up and recognized him immediately. "Oh, good morning. Back again." The man nodded. "Do you remember the father from yesterday? The one who asked about a discounted cake?" The employee's expression softened. "Yes, of course. He comes in sometimes. He's always very polite. Do you know where he works?" The man asked gently. The employee hesitated only for a moment, then nodded. "I've seen him repair tools near the old market. It's a small workshop at the corner." The man thanked him and left. He made his way through the busy streets until he found the small workshop. The sign above the door was faded, and the windows were slightly dusty. When he stepped inside, he saw the father hunched over a table, repairing a small machine part. The father looked up, surprised. "You?" he whispered, standing up. The man smiled. "I hope I'm not interrupting." No, the father said quickly. "I just didn't expect to see you here." "I wanted to talk to you," the man said gently. The father wiped his hands on a cloth and motioned for him to sit on a small stool. The man sat comfortably, though the stool was far too small for someone used to luxury. "I wanted to thank you again," the father said quietly. "Not just for the cake, but for the way you helped without making me feel embarrassed." "I didn't do anything special," the man replied. The father shook his head. "You have no idea what it meant to us." There was a small pause before the man spoke. "I went home yesterday thinking a lot," he said. "About you. About your boy. About how life can be unfair, and how sometimes people just need someone to notice." The father listened with quiet curiosity. "I'd like to help," the man continued. "Not in a way that makes you feel small, but in a way that gives you space to breathe." The father frowned lightly, unsure of what that meant. "I don't want to take charity," he said softly. "I want to work. I want to earn whatever comes to me." "I know," the man said gently. "That's why I'm not offering charity." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope, placing it on the table. The father stared at it. "What is this?" he asked. "An opportunity," the man replied. "I run a company that repairs, builds, and designs many things. Your skill, your patience, your way of working, it's important. I'd like you to come work for me." The father's breath caught. "I don't know if I'm qualified," he whispered. "You are," the man said firmly. "I wouldn't be here if you weren't." The father slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a job offer, simple, clear, and steady. A salary that would allow him to stand tall. Health insurance for him and his boy. A schedule that wouldn't keep him away from his child. He stared at the paper, his hands trembling. "I don't know what to say," he said finally. "Say yes," the man replied with a warm smile. The father looked up, his eyes shining in a way he couldn't hide. Yes, I will." The man nodded, relief spreading across his face. "Good. Then we start a new chapter." The father took a deep breath, as if a heavy stone had been lifted from his heart. "But why me?" he asked softly. "There are many people who need help." The man looked at him with quiet honesty. "Because you reminded me what kindness looks like," he said. "And because your boy deserves a childhood where birthdays don't depend on luck." The father swallowed hard, unable to speak. "And one more thing," the man added. The father looked up. "I'd like to meet your boy properly," he said. "Not as a stranger at a bakery, but as someone who believes in you." The father nodded slowly, a soft smile forming on his lips. "He'd like that," he whispered. He folded the job offer carefully and pressed it close to his chest. For the first time in many years, hope didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt real. It felt possible. Outside the workshop, the sun shone a little brighter, as if the world itself was quietly celebrating a small miracle. And so, without loud announcements or grand gestures, a new journey began, one born from a single moment of kindness, a simple cake, and the belief that even the smallest act of compassion can change a life forever.